Chairman.
The clerk is prepared. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Chairman.
Motion to no.
Mr. Chairman votes no. Ms. Lofgren? Ms. Lofgren votes no. Ms. Jackson-Lee? Ms. Jackson-Lee votes no. Mr. Cohen? Mr. Cohen votes no. Mr. Johnson? Mr. Johnson votes no. Mr. Deutsch? Mr. Deutsch votes no. Ms. Bass? Ms. Bass votes no. Mr. Richmond? No. Mr. Richmond votes no. Mr. Jeffries? No. Mr. Jeffries votes no. Mr. Cicilline?
So we may continue to pursue the truth, I vote no.
Mr. Cicilline votes no. Mr. Swalwell?
No.
Mr. Swalwell votes no. Mr. Liu? Mr. Liu votes no. Mr. Raskin?
No.
Mr. Raskin votes no. Ms. Jayapal? No. Ms. Jayapal votes no. Ms. Demings? No. Ms. Demings votes no. Mr. Correa? No. Mr. Correa votes no. Ms. Scanlon?
No.
Ms. Scanlon votes no. Ms. Garcia?
No.
Ms. Garcia votes no. Mr. Neguse?
No.
Mr. Neguse votes no. Ms. McBath? No. Ms. McBath votes no. Mr. Staunton?
No.
Mr. Stanton votes no. Ms. Dean?
No.
Ms. Dean votes no. Ms. Murcassel-Powell?
No.
Ms. Murcassel-Powell votes no. Ms. Escobar?
No.
Ms. Escobar votes no. Mr. Collins? Mr. Collins votes yes. Mr. Sensenbrenner? Mr. Chabot? Mr. Chabot votes aye. Mr. Gomert? Mr. Gomert votes aye. Mr. Jordan? Mr. Jordan votes yes. Mr. Buck? Mr. Ratcliffe? Ms. Roby? Mr. Gates? Mr. Johnson? Mr. Biggs? Mr. Biggs votes aye. Mr. McClintock? Mr. McClintock votes aye. Ms. Lesko? Ms. Lesko votes aye. Mr. Rentschler? Mr. Klein? Mr. Klein votes aye. Ms. Armstrong? Ms. Armstrong votes aye. Mr. Stube? Are there any other members wishing to vote?
Haven't voted. Gentleman from Texas? Yes. Are there any other members who wish to vote who haven't voted?
Mr. Ratcliffe votes aye. Yep.
Clerk will report.
Mr. Chairman, there are 24 noes and 10 ayes.
The motion to adjourn is not approved. I will now introduce today's witness. Matthew G. Whitaker is the Acting Attorney General of the United States. Previously, Mr. Whitaker served as Chief of Staff to Attorney General Jeff Sessions. He was appointed as the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of Iowa on June 15, 2004 by President George W. Bush. Before that, he was a managing partner of the Des Moines-based law firm Whitaker, Hagenau, and Gustav, LLP. He was also the executive director for FACT, the Foundation for Accountability and Civic Trust, between 2014 and 2017. Mr. Whitaker graduated with a Master of Business Administration, Juris Doctor, and Bachelor of Arts from the University of Iowa. We welcome Mr. Whitaker, and we thank him for participating in today's hearing. Now, if you would please rise, I'll begin by swearing you in. Raise your right arm. Do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is true and correct to the best of your knowledge, information, and belief, so help you God? Thank you. Let the record show that the witness answered in the affirmative. Thank you, and please be seated. Please note that your written testimony will be entered into the record in its entirety. Accordingly, I ask that you summarize your testimony in 5 minutes. To help you stay within that time, there is a timing light on your table. When the light switches from green to yellow, you will have 1 minute to conclude your testimony. When the light turns red, it signals the time is expired. Mr. Whitaker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Collins, for the opportunity to testify before the committee today. I am looking forward to discussing with you some of the accomplishments and priorities of the Department of Justice. Before I start, I would also like to acknowledge the passing of former Chairman Dingell. He was a statesman and a leader, and it is a sad day in this committee, I'm certain. First of all, let me say that it's an honor to represent the 115,000 men and women of the Department of Justice. The department is blessed with extremely talented, highly principled public servants who are dedicated to upholding our great Constitution and the laws of the United States. I saw that up close during my 5.5 years as United States Attorney for the Southern District of Iowa. Our office put criminals behind bars, and we kept the people of Iowa safe. I personally prosecuted several important criminal cases and worked with the men and women of the ATF, DEA, FBI, and U.S. Marshal Service, and our state, local, and federal partners. It was a privilege. In 2017, I returned to the department and served for 13 months as Chief of Staff to former Attorney General Jeff Sessions, a man for whom I have great respect. He led the department with integrity, with dedication to the rule of law, and with a commitment to carrying out the policies of the President of the United States. I am deeply honored that the President selected me to continue this work at the department. The Senate will soon consider President's nomination for our next Attorney General. And let me just say this, no one is more qualified than Bill Barr. I am working to ensure that he will inherit a strong, confident, and effective Department of Justice, and I believe that he will. For the last 3 months, I have had the privilege of serving as Acting Attorney General, and I am impressed every single day by the dedication and hard work of our agents, our attorneys, and our support staff. Over this time, I have visited a number of our offices and met with federal prosecutors from across the country. For example, in December, we held our Project Safe Neighborhoods Conference, where employees from nearly every U.S. Attorney's office and hundreds of our state and local partners celebrated our successes and reductions in violent crime. Our hard work is paying off. I firmly believe that your constituents are safer because of the work that we have done over the past 2 years. Under this administration, crime is down and police morale is up. In fiscal year 2017, the Justice Department charged the largest number of violent crime defendants since we started to track this category back when Bill Barr was Attorney General the last time. And then in fiscal year 2018, we broke that record again by a margin of nearly 15%. We also charged more defendants with gun crimes than ever before. In fact, we broke that record by a margin of 17%. The department has also banned bump stocks, improved the background check system, and prosecuted those who lied to get a gun. Our work is having an impact. In 2017, after 2 years of increases under the previous administration, violent crime and homicide rates went down nationwide. We do not have official numbers yet for 2018, but one estimate projected that the murder rate in our 29 biggest cities would drop by 7.6%. Those are real lives being saved. Much of the crime in this country is related to drug abuse and drug trafficking. But under this administration, prescriptions for the 7 most frequently abused prescription drugs are down more than 21%, to the lowest level in at least a decade. At the same time, the DEA has lowered the legal limits on production of the active ingredients in these prescription opioids by 47% since 2016. And there is no doubt in the law enforcement community that the vast majority of the illegal drugs in this country are coming through our southern border. There is also no doubt that criminals and cartels seek to exploit weaknesses in our southern border for their own profits and purposes, including by subjecting women and children to dangerous and unspeakable conditions in an attempt to smuggle them into the United States. And of course, the dangers of our porous southern border become all more apparent every time an illegal alien causes harm or death to an innocent American across this country, such as what happened to an outstanding young woman from my home state, Sarah Root. For this reason and for others, we continue our efforts to restore the rule of law at the border and in our immigration system. In fiscal charged more defendants with illegal entry than in any other year in American history. In fact, we charged 85% more defendants with illegally entering America than we did the previous year. At the same time, we increased the number of felony illegal reentry prosecutions by more than 38%. Whatever our views on immigration policy, we should all be opposed to illegal immigration, and we should support these efforts. The department is also taking decisive action against human trafficking, both domestically and internationally. Human traffickers, like other criminal enterprises, take advantage of our southern porous border to smuggle women and children into the United States to exploit them. We are bringing prosecutions to dismantle transnational trafficking networks that lure victims across our borders and traffic them for profits. Last year, the Department of Justice secured a record of 526 human trafficking convictions, a 5% increase from the previous year. The department is also doing its part to aggressively prosecute hate crimes. Under this administration, we indicted 50 hate crime defendants and obtained 30 hate crime convictions in fiscal year 2018. In November, the department provided election monitoring at polling places around the country. Our Civil Rights Division deployed personnel to 35 districts in 19 states to monitor for compliance with federal voting rights laws. Our Public Integrity Section prosecutors served as subject matter experts for federal prosecutors and investigators nationwide, working with the FBI at the Strategic Information and Operations Center. Over my time as Acting Attorney General, I have done everything in my power to continue regular order at the Department of Justice. The department has continued to make its law enforcement decisions based upon the facts and the law of each individual case in accordance with established department practices and independent of any outside interference. At no time has the White House asked for, nor have I provided, any promises or commitments concerning the special counsel's investigation or any other investigation. Since becoming Acting Attorney General, I have run the Department of Justice with fidelity to the law and to the Constitution. During my time as the leader of the Department of Justice, the department has complied with the special counsel regulations, and there has been no change in how the department has worked with the special counsel's office. Over the past day, the department and the committee have exchanged letters concerning the respective prerogatives of the legislative and executive branches. I am pleased that we are able to reach an agreement that allows me to appear here voluntarily. I am pleased also that we agreed that each branch would seek to accommodate each other, and that if we have differences, we will try to work them out in good faith before resorting to subpoenas or other formal legal processes. I will answer the committee's questions as best I can, but I will continue the long-standing executive branch practice of not disclosing information that may be subject to executive privilege, such as the contents of conversations with the President. As the Supreme Court has recognized, this executive privilege is fundamental to the operation of government and inextricably rooted in the separation of powers under the Constitution. I have spent nearly 1/3 of my professional career at the Department of Justice, and I am personally committed to its success and integrity. I hope that today's hearing will be constructive and help us partner together to address the priorities of the American people. The men and women of this department are proud of our accomplishments, but we know that Congress can help us to achieve even more. And as our agents and our prosecutors have shown you again and again, they deserve your support. Thank you once again for the opportunity to testify today and for your attention to the matters facing the Department of Justice.
Thank you for your testimony. We will now proceed under the 5-minute rule with questions. I will begin by recognizing myself for 5 minutes. Now, we fully intend to examine substantive questions of the department policy, but part of our job is to make sure that core investigations at the department have not been compromised. So, at a press conference last week, sir, you said that you have been fully briefed on the special counsel's investigation. I would like to better understand that comment. Yes or no, since your appointment as Acting Attorney General, have you been briefed on criminal or counterintelligence matters within the special counsel's purview?
Chairman, thank you for that question. As you know, I cannot talk about ongoing investigations.
You can say whether you've been briefed or not.
And as you commented about my recent press conference, as it relates to the special counsel's investigation, I have been briefed on it.
So the answer is yes, thank you. Were you briefed on those matters at any point while you were serving as Chief of Staff to Attorney General Sessions?
Chairman, I know you're very interested in the special counsel's investigation, and so I want to be very clear about this. Because General Sessions was recused from the special counsel's investigation, I had no involvement in the special counsel's investigation.
So the answer is no. Thank you. How many times were you briefed about the special counsel's work, and when did the briefings take place?
Mr. Chairman, I've said all that I'm planning on saying about the number of times or the briefings that I've received on the special counsel's investigation. It is the subject matter of an ongoing investigation. I think it would be very improper for me, as I sit here today,
Wait a minute,
to talk anything more about
whether you were briefed is the subject of an ongoing investigation? I didn't follow that.
No, the number of times I've been briefed in my involvement in the investigation, sir.
Well, it's our understanding that at least one briefing occurred in December before your decision not to recuse yourself on December 19th and Christmas Day. Is that correct?
What's the basis for that question, sir?
Yes or no? Is it correct? It is our understanding that at least one briefing occurred between your decision not to recuse yourself on December 19th and 6 days later, Christmas Day. Is that correct? Simple enough question. Yes or no?
Mr. Chairman, again, what is the basis for your question? You're saying that it is your
Sure, I'm asking the questions. I only have 5 minutes. So please answer yes or no.
No, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to, you were asking me a question. It is your understanding. Can you tell me where you get the basis?
No, I'm not going to tell you that. I don't have time to get into that. I'm just asking you if that's correct or not. Is it correct? Were you briefed in that time period between December 19th and Christmas Day? Simple question, yes or no?
Congressman, if every member here today asks questions based on their mere speculation,
all right, never mind. At any point, yes or no, at any point since that briefing, have you communicated any information you learned in that briefing to President Trump?
Mr. Chairman, I know that there is a unique and
yes or no
special interest in this. I'm sorry?
It's a yes or no question. Have you communicated anything you learned in that briefing about the investigation to President Trump? Yes or no?
Mr. Chairman, as I've said earlier today in my opening remarks, I do not intend today to talk about my private conversations with the President of the United States. But to answer your question, I have not talked to the President of the United States about the special counsel's investigation.
So the answer is no. Thank you. To any other White House official?
Again, Mr. Chairman, as I mentioned in my opening statement, I do not intend today to talk about my private conversations with the President nor White House officials. But I will tell you, consistent with what I've already said, I have not talked about the special counsel's investigation with senior White House officials.
Okay. To any third party not already briefed about the special counsel's investigation who might have conveyed that information to the President or his legal team?
Who do you consider third-party individuals?
Well, it's really for your consideration. To any third party not already briefed about that investigation who might have conveyed, who you think might have conveyed that information to President Trump or his legal team?
Third persons who I think may have conveyed that information?
Yes.
You know, as I sit here in this chair right now, Mr. Chairman, you know, that's an impossible question for me to ask. I mean, I do not believe that I have briefed third-party individuals outside of the Department of Justice. I have received the briefings myself, and I am usually the endpoint of that information.
But you won't answer the question.
I just did answer your question.
I don't think you did, but let me just say this. Your iteration of the department's longstanding policy appears designed to delay answering these questions as long as possible. I find that unacceptable. I understand the role of executive privilege and respect its value in our system of governance. However, Congress is a co-equal branch of government. We have a responsibility to conduct oversight. This is a responsibility we take very seriously. I've repeatedly tried to work with your office, first in delaying the hearing until February, and then in providing you our questions in advance. I did this because the executive branch's own rules governing assertion of privilege, which were issued by President Reagan and have been followed ever since, say that ultimately it is up to the President to decide whether or not he wants to assert executive privilege. You cannot repeat forever that the President might want to assert privilege. I've given you a fair opportunity to prepare for the hearing and to speak with the White House in advance so that we could avoid this fight in the first place, but you don't appear to have done any of that. The Department's failure to do its due diligence here, to me, is deeply troubling. I do not believe that issuing a subpoena here would correct the problem, but I'm going to give you the opportunity to rectify the situation. After today's hearing, we will attempt to reach an accommodation with the Department to obtain answers to these questions. As part of that process, I ask for your commitment to return for a deposition before this committee in the coming weeks, under oath, with an understanding that the transcript will be released to the public as soon as practicable thereafter. Any questions that are unanswered today or require consultation with the White House will be asked again at that proceeding, and I expect either a clean answer or a proper assertion of privilege claimed by the President. I would ask members on both sides of the aisle to make those questions clear for the record so we know what must be addressed at the future proceeding. Now, in your capacity as Acting Attorney General, have you ever been asked to approve any request or action to be taken by the Special Counsel?
Mr. Chairman, I see that your 5 minutes is up, and so I'm here voluntarily. We have agreed to 5-minute rounds, and
the committee.
I think that's a fine place to end the 5-minute rule.
The committee will end. Will come to order. I will point out that we didn't enforce the 5-minute rule on Acting Attorney General Whitaker. We will.
I understand, Mr. Chairman. I was just saying that might be a good breaking point at that point for you.
No, the Attorney General was in the middle of saying something. Answer the question, please.
Regular order.
Should I ask the question? Okay.
yeah,
In your capacity
please
as
ask the
acting,
question.
let me just repeat the question so people remember what we're talking about. In your capacity as Acting Attorney General, have you ever been asked to approve any request or action to be taken by the Special Counsel?
Mr. Chairman, as the Acting Attorney General, I am, under the Special Counsel's rules, I am the person that is ultimately in charge of the investigation, and I have exercised that authority under the Special Counsel's regulations of the Department of Justice.
So I assume the answer is yes.
Regular order, Mr. Chairman.
I assume the answer is yes. You have been asked to approve a request or action, and you've said yes or no? In other words,
Mr. Chairman, I want to be very clear about what you're asking me. Are you asking me if I have asked the Special Counsel to do something?
Regular order, Mr. Chairman.
is this whole thing? Well, I'm asking if I think my words were clear enough. Have you ever been asked to approve any request or action to be taken by the Special Counsel? Last week, you commented on the status of the investigation, stating it was close to being completed, unquote. This was said despite the fact you recognized just moments before that it was ongoing, stating, quote, I really am not going to talk about an open and ongoing investigation otherwise, close quote. So all I'm asking you is, have you been asked to approve or disapprove a request or action to be taken by the Special Counsel?
Point of order, Mr. Chairman.
I've asked the question.
Point of order, Mr. Chairman.
Point of order is not in order until the question is answered.
We're not operating under the 5-minute rule anymore, then?
Point of order, the witness will answer the question.
I want to be very specific about this, Mr. Chairman, because I think it's going to allay a lot of fears that have existed among this committee, among the legislative branch largely, and maybe among some American people. We have followed the Special Counsel's regulations to a T. There has been no event, no decision that has required me to take any action, and I have not interfered in any way with the Special Counsel's investigation.
Very good. Thank you. My time has expired. I now recognize the ranking member, the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, it is laying out exactly as we thought. This is my colleagues across the aisle. When we had questions about the FBI's operation and investigations, it was, oh, stay away. We don't want to get close to Mueller. In fact, the chairman even said, you know, is it no longer okay to wait for Robert Mueller? Well, it's no longer right. They got you in front of them right now, so get ready. This is all this is going to be, DOJ oversight. And it is, I'm just going to say it for a second, there is some things interesting here that you did point out in your opening statement that do need addressing. And I think there's a lot of things, whether it be voting rights issues, whether it be civil rights issues and other things, and I get that. But I'm also going to deal with something that is directly under your oversight purview, Mr. Acting Attorney General, and we're going to talk about something I've written a letter about. And I believe that lying before this body or anybody is wrong, especially under oath, and that's not the issue, but the issue is tactics. And a question is, were you aware of Roger Stone's indictment before it became public?
Congressman, that's as you know, an important question. It is also, Mr. Stone is part of an ongoing investigation, but I have, again, been briefed on the special counsel's investigation. That would have been that would have been considered a development that I would have been briefed on, and I was briefed on that.
Are you familiar from public reports or otherwise that a CNN reporter was camped out outside of Stone's house when the FBI arrested him? This wouldn't be part of the investigation.
I am aware of that, and it was deeply concerning to me as to how CNN found out about that.
Well, that is I'm glad we're going down that road, Mr. Attorney General, because this is did somebody at the Department of Justice seemingly share a draft indictment with CNN prior to Stone's arrest? Prior to a grand jury's finding of a true bill?
Ranking Member Collins, the court had a sealed indictment that after Mr. Stone's arrest was unsealed. Consistent with all its prior indictments, the DOJ's basic policy for transparency in criminal cases is that the indictment is posted on the DOJ webpage promptly after it's unsealed, and then media outlets were notified. We do not know of any, and I do not know of any other special counsel's office notice or DOJ notice to media outlets regarding Mr. Stone's indictment or his arrest. And otherwise, you know, I really, as I sit here today, don't have any other information that I can talk about regarding Mr. Stone.
Well, given your answer even just then, it does seem concerning given the timing of this reporter's knowledge and other things that there seems to have been a gap in that discovery. And just another question is if anybody would outside this, would you view this as a problem? Because this looks like this is something, I'm just asking, as in your final days here, would this be a problem with DOJ if we're looking at the timing doesn't match up, that it seems to appear that this was given pre or prior knowledge, not going through the normal channels? Because if it was given through normal channels, every media outlet would have been there, but only one was.
Mr. Collins, I share your concern with the possibility that a media outlet was tipped off to Mr. Stone's either indictment or arrest before it was made, that information was available to the public.
One of the other issues, and this is, you know, since we're going to go down this, the chairman wanted to have this, this is a question that's not unfamiliar, and it should be. Is Bruce Orr still employed with the Department of Justice?
To answer your question directly, Mr. Collins, Bruce Orr is currently employed with the Department of Justice.
Okay. Is there any process at this point, or that you could comment? I understand personnel issues, but are you aware of the discussions and also the implication investigations from Congress and from others surrounding Bruce Orr's involvement in many of the investigation problems that we have seen over the past few years at DOJ?
Mr. Collins, I am generally aware of Mr. Orr being questions being raised about his behavior at the Department of Justice.
Let me tell you it a different way. Knowing what you know and seeing what you have seen and using your past experience and prior knowledge, do you believe that Mr. Orr was operating outside normal channels and appropriate channels in which he was operating under, which has been publicly reported?
Mr. Collins, this is a very important question for many people, both in this body and in the general public. The Office of Inspector General is currently looking at the Carter Page FISA application,
which is very much of a concern.
And it is also being reviewed at the same time and simultaneously by Mr. John Huber, who's the U.S. Attorney from Utah, who was asked by Attorney General Sessions to conduct a review of certain matters at the Department of Justice. And so, together with the fact that any situation regarding Mr. Orr's employment would be part of a confidential human resources process, I just am unable to talk any more about Mr. Orr, his involvement in any matters that could be subject to either an Inspector General's investigation or a human resource matter.
Well, Acting Attorney General Whitaker, barring the, now again, as we had another part to our play this morning, we are now finding out that you may be subpoenaed to come back and do a deposition, which again, as we continue down this line, is any way around this to continue to attack it at the investigation of the president. This is again, is just an amazing, I just want to say one, in your last few days, you know, do your best, do your job, and continue to do that part. But also at a certain point in time, there's many on this committee, many on our side of the aisle, as well as the other side of the aisle, that have been very concerned with what we have seen at the Department of Justice, especially in the FBI, and especially over the last few years, that should turn every citizen, whether they're Republican, Democrat, Independent, could care less about politics. When there's ever a perception, and I've shared this with others that have came before you to testify, whenever there is a perception that there is not an equal treatment on either side, that is a problem. It needs to be addressed. I'm hoping that when Bill Barr comes in, this will be one of his first steps that we can continue with. I know you've attempted to do that, but this is going to be a long day, and it's going to be a day in which we chase a lot of rabbits. Unfortunately, when we get to the end of the day, the good men and women in the Department side of the Department of Justice, which is what you were pitched with back before the chairman was the chairman, this is not going to be an oversight hearing. It's going to be more of a rabbit chase down a lot of holes. With that, I yield back.
Mr. Collins, if you don't, Mr. Chairman, may I answer his
You may.
question? Yeah, I think it's important as we sit here today that we understand that this is not a confirmation hearing, that I am probably going to be replaced by Bill Barr in the next week. This is an oversight hearing for the Department of Justice. And I'm surprised, as we've both had the chairman and the ranking member talk about what they want to talk about, that we haven't talked anything about the work regarding violent crime. We haven't talked about the opioid crisis. We haven't talked about religious liberty. We haven't talked about free speech on our college campuses and a whole host of other issues that I know are very important to you. And I look forward to talking about the substance of the work at the Department of Justice. But if this, I mean, it is your 5 minutes, and you can ask the questions that are of most interest to you. But as I sit here today, I would like to talk about the incredible work that we've been doing at the Department of Justice since I was Chief of Staff and now Acting Attorney General. So,
I appreciate that, but if you'd have been glued to a TV yesterday morning, you'd have found out this wasn't what this was going to be about. Thank you, Mr. Attorney.
Ladies and gentlemen, there are votes on the floor. There are 11 minutes left. We're informed they're going to strictly enforce the 15-minute rule. We'll see if that's true, but we will not risk it. So the committee will...
Sorry, 15-minute rule, is that changed now?
The committee will stand in recess until immediately after the last in this series of votes.